Hi, welcome. My name is Sarah and this is Wicked Reading. So before I get into it, I would just like to say hello, hi, welcome to all the new subscribers. Thank you so much. We hit 500 subscribers and that is crazy to me. I am just so grateful that there are people that are willing to spend time with me while I talk about books. You guys are all officially like my best friends. But let's go ahead and get into the video. So today's video is going to be my February wrap up. So it's going to be all the books that I read in February, and I'm actually going to do my stats this month because I want to start doing that because I haven't done that before. I keep track of everything on Storygraph. So this month I read 11 books, which is actually pretty good. 4 of those were actually manga, and then the rest of the 7 are just normal novels. So with all 11 books, I read 3,420 pages. And as far as my moods go, I was very much an adventurous, emotional, and dark reader for the month. For the genres, my main genres were romance, fantasy, and manga. And for the star ratings, I did not rate every single book that I read this month. I read a memoir, and I never rate memoirs unless it's like a 100% 5 out of 5. If it's anything that might be less than that in my mind, I just don't even rate it because who am I to rate somebody's life experience? I'm not the one for that. And then I didn't really rate any of the mangas except one, which I'll talk about. But for me, manga series, unless there's a very much standout one, like I have to give it 5 out of 5, I don't really rate individual volumes very often. So my average rating after these 7 books that I actually legitimately rated was a 3.57. So overall this month was like, it was okay. Like it wasn't a horrible month, but I really read just about across the board every type of star rating I could think to give. So yeah, I do have 1 5-star, but it was quite a mixed month. So first, I'm going to talk about the books that I read that are part of series. I did end up finishing a series, and I started a series, and I'm in the middle of one series. And then after that, we'll talk about the other books that I read that are more so standalone. So first, I need to talk about this book. So bad. I actually did listen to this on audiobook. The Lady of the Lake by Andrzej Sapkowski, and this is part of the Witcher series. Now it's a little bit confusing, the series in general, because there are 8 books, but then 2 of the books are short story collections that most people say to read first, and then there are 5 core books that are like the core story, and then there is an 8th book that I don't even really know what it entails. I think it's just kind of like more stories about Geralt, but I'm not even gonna read that one. So I had such mixed emotions while I was reading this series in general. Some of the books were really great, other books were just like, okay. This book sucked so bad. So I can't really obviously say too much about this particular book because it is the last book of the core series. I could literally make a separate video ranting about this series as a whole, specifically about this book. This was the worst way I have ever seen a series end. It was just so bad. Overall, this book was just messy. So messy. The pacing was so weird compared to all the other books. In all the other books, other than the short story collections, in the other books of the core series, the pacing is very slow. You're getting very, very detailed descriptions and characters, and there's just a lot of detail and it's slow. And I didn't mind that. I liked that. Now, this one, the pacing was so weird because certain aspects of the story would be slow paced, and then other aspects of the story were so fast paced. And I'm particularly pissed off that the end was super, super fast paced. And it just like, it made it where the ending just comes and the climax of this extremely long series that you've been dedicating hours and hours to, it comes to just a super unsatisfying ending. And not just in the sense of like, you don't like what happens in the end, but it happens so fast compared to the whole series that it's just kind of like, when it happened, I was like, did that just happen? Like, I thought I skipped a couple of chapters somehow. I was like, there's no way that that happened so fast and so anticlimactically. Oh my god, seriously guys, I could rant about this book so hardcore. I'm gonna try to contain myself. Pretty much this book was just so messy. The pacing made no sense. So much of the book I did not care about at all. And the way it ended just did not match the characters. The characters were making choices that just didn't make sense with them. And we have gotten to know these characters very deeply. And then the ending was just so lackluster. So lackluster. I was so mad when it ended. When it ended, actually, I did not realize that it was the last book of the core series. I didn't realize that the 8th book was also kind of like a side book in a way. And so when it ended, I was like, wait, what? It was just such a disappointment. To summarize it, it was just such a disappointment. It really almost makes me not like the whole series as much. Like, there was a book in the series that I gave 5 stars. I did really enjoy that installment of the story. But like now, I almost want to go back and reorganize my star ratings and kind of bump some of those down. It was not good. It was not good, guys. I would not recommend this series because the ending just sucked so bad, you guys. This was a 1.5 star. The only reason it got above a 1 is because there were small aspects to the book that I did actually like, but the aspects I liked out of the book didn't even really have to do with the main storyline or our main characters. The things that I liked out of the book were totally just like, had nothing to do with the story. So then next in the month of February, I started a new manga series. I say started, but I did read the first volume last year, and I decided to carry on with the manga series, and I read volumes 2 through 5 of Yona of the Dawn. This series is so good. This volume right here, this is volume 2, is the only 5-star rating that I gave for the whole month. But this was so good. So the series in general is about our princess Yona, and tragedy strikes her temple, and she is forced to flee the temple, and she's kind of running away because people are going after her. And she runs away with her bodyguard general named Hawk. And I'm not even gonna lie, I have such a huge crush on Hawk now. First of all, let me show you guys my favorite picture of Hawk. I have such a crush on him now. He is just so stinking cute. Look at that picture. Heartthrob, oh my goodness. I kind of just follow these two as they flee, and a bunch of stuff happens. It's very adventurous, it's very fun. The secondary characters in this series, and the main characters, like the characters in general of this series, are so great and they're so individualized and so well thought out. They all have their own personality, and it's a great time. And the artwork style of this manga series is so gorgeous. I am totally obsessed with the artwork style of this. It's so detailed and it's so pretty, and I just really love it. And I've been having such a good time with this manga series. I feel like we're very much going to see Yona really come into herself. She was this very naive, very catered to princess in the temple, and she really wants to learn how to fight for herself and fight for what's right. And we are already starting to get so much character development with her and all the rest of the characters, and I just totally love this manga series so much so far. Now, I will warn you guys that it is a very long manga series, so be prepared. They are around their 38th volume. So keep that in mind if you're not wanting to start something that is extremely long, because it is quite a commitment. So next I did start another series, and that is the Throne of Glass series. So I read both the Assassin's Blade and Throne of Glass. I did read Assassin's Blade first. It is technically like a prequel, but some people say like you don't have to read this one, but I 100% think that you have to read this one before you go into this. There's so many like references to characters that you really mostly know because of this book, and events. Like, there's so many events and characters in this book that are referenced in this one that if I did not read this one, I'd be like, who are we talking about? Like, what? You definitely need to read this one first. So in the Assassin's Blade, we are following an assassin named Selena Sardathian, and she is just a trained assassin. She's very young. She's 16 in the beginning of this book, so she is very young, and she is part of this assassin's guild. This is technically a collection of like novellas, but they do occur consecutively and in like a timeline. Now, I will say that the first story it was not my thing at all. The first story was just way too angsty, and there was a little bit too much kind of convenience for the character. It was a little bit cringy, it was way too angsty, but I pushed through and I finished through the rest, and I really ended up enjoying this. That first one just wasn't for me, but the rest were really great, and I did end up giving this a 4 out of 5. So then after I finished The Assassin's Blade, I read Throne of Glass. This one is picking up a year after The Assassin's Blade ends. So in this one, we're also still following Selena. In the beginning of this, she is getting picked up from a prison, and she is offered the opportunity to partake in a competition and battle it out to become the king's champion. And if she becomes the king's champion, all she has to do is work for him for a few years, and then after that she gets her freedom and she doesn't have to go back to prison, and she can just go off and do her own thing. So she decides to compete in this competition as the prince's competitor, and so she is taken to the castle and we follow her throughout this. Now I will say the competition like happens kind of a lot in the background. We do get some of the competition happening on page, but if you're going into this book wanting to really be submerged in this competition, you're really not going to get that, to be totally honest. It's very actually more so focused on a romance, which I didn't really expect. I didn't hate it, but I didn't really necessarily expect it. There is an aspect of kind of like a love triangle thing. I do feel like that's important to know because that really changes if it's like a book based on this competition that they talk about, or if it's like a fantasy romance, and it does lean more towards fantasy romance. I did enjoy this one. I will say there wasn't as much action as I expected. Like I said, it leaned way more fantasy romance, which I don't know why I didn't expect that with Sarah J. Maas, but I just didn't. Now that didn't really deter my liking for the book at all, but there's just something that I wasn't fully grasping. It could be because this is a very early writing for Sarah J. Maas. It might have just been a little bit too early in her writing days for me to connect with it as much as I did with like the ACOTAR series. Even the Assassin's Blade, I feel like I connected more with that writing. This one was just, it wasn't, I don't want to say surface level, but more surface level compared to her usual writing. And there were just some aspects that I was just like, I didn't not like, but I also wasn't like in love with anything in particular. It was good, it was entertaining, it didn't quite hit the mark for me everywhere, so 3.5, still not bad, still recommend, and I do feel like the series will get better, so I'm looking forward to the rest. So that was all the books that are part of series. So now we're going to jump into my standalones, and I will go in order from my lowest rated to my highest rated. The first book we have is We Spread by Ian Reid. The premise of this book is we are following our main character Penny, and she is older in age. Her partner recently passed, and they had been living in the same apartment for decades, since they moved in together actually. So she's been living in this apartment for a very long time. Now she's living on her own, and things kind of start to slip. She starts to forget things. She starts to kind of lose moments of time, and eventually she ends up falling, and her landlord comes and collects her and then eventually brings her to this house that she is to live in, and they are telling her that her and her partner actually created this plan for her to live here once living on her own got too hard, but she doesn't remember any of this, but she's just kind of going with it anyway. So now she's living at this house with 3 other residents, and she starts to feel weird. It becomes a story about whether she is just experiencing what happens when we start to age, we start to forget things, or is there something more sinister going on? This book does create a very interesting and very creepy atmosphere, and there are some really well written and unsettling moments. That being said, I unfortunately just did not jive with this book like I expected. I went in thinking this was going to be a 5-star, and I ended up giving it 3 stars. Now, it was not bad, but for me, specifically kind of how it ends, it is a very ambiguous ending, and I actually don't usually mind ambiguous endings. I like them a lot of the time, but this one was extremely ambiguous. It just felt very vague and unsatisfying in the end. Despite it being like a potentially fast read and fast book, there was a certain moment of it that it just kind of felt like it started dragging. I think my main issue with this was I just wasn't emotionally attached to Penny. We get a little bit of Penny's background and her reflecting on her past life, but I do wish we got more of that. I wish that that was a little bit more at the forefront and we were able to attach to Penny even more. She talks about her partner and a couple things about him, but we really don't get anything else about that, and I just kind of thought that the partner aspect was weird. I don't, maybe there is some connection that I just didn't make, but it just felt almost unnecessary. It was an okay read. A lot of people love it, so I recommend still reading it if it sounds like you're interested in it. It just didn't really hit the mark for me. Next up, I read Blood Orange by Karina Hall. So this is a dark romance with vampires and witches. So we follow our two characters. Baltu is a vampire and Dahlia is a witch who specifically hunts vampires. So she is actually sent to kill Baltu, who is the vampire that inspired Dracula. From there, pretty much a romance ensues. The synopsis says a little bit more, and I feel like I wish it said less. So I'm only going to tell you guys that much. If you want to read the synopsis, it does hint at a couple other things. Now, this was one of my first dark, like spicy romances that I've ever read, and I did enjoy it. When I first started it, I was really enjoying it. It set up a really interesting side plot, and for me, for my romance and even any type of spicy stuff that happens, I just needed to be well balanced with the rest of the plot and what else is going on. I don't really like just spice. I do like still a good plot to follow as well, and this did set up a really interesting side plot that was very mysterious, and I was looking so forward to getting into that and kind of understanding what else was going on in the story. But there was a big shift about halfway through this book where the last half really focuses on the romance aspect, and while it was like good, it just totally neglected the side plot, so that was a little bit of a bummer for me. And I will say I did enjoy the spice and like the romance. But with this book, one of the things I noticed is that us as the reader know a lot of things that are going on and know a lot more than the characters know. So a lot of the reading experience is watching the characters figure things out that we already know. So for me, it kind of creates a less interesting book and less interesting reading experience. I like discovering things with characters. That's why I was so interested by the side plot, is because it was very mysterious. The characters didn't know, we didn't know, but everything with the romance, we knew. So we were just waiting for the characters to figure it out as well. I will say that the way that this ended had my jaw on the floor, like completely. I did not expect it to end the way it ended. This does have a sequel, so I went in expecting not everything to be solved, so I do have more forgiveness towards the fact that that side plot wasn't fully fleshed out. While I did really like the way that this book was ended, and it was very much a oh my god kind of moment, I will say the epilogue is very meh, and it makes me feel like we're already going to go into the sequel again with so much more information than the characters have, and I just really hope it's not another experience of us just watching and waiting for the characters to figure out everything that we already know. And I hope that it doesn't do the side plot dirty, and I hope that that really gets fleshed out and is interesting. So while I did really enjoy this, I did actually like the romance. The side plot was interestingly set up. The sequel is really gonna make or break how I feel about this. So right now I have this at a 3.5 because again, I am very forgiving towards it since there is a sequel, but that sequel is really gonna make or break how I feel about kind of the two books together. And that brings us to my next book, and that is Warm Bodies by Isaac Marion. So I actually really enjoyed this book. This was a 4.5 out of 5 for me, very close to a 5, but not quite there. But in this story, we follow our main character, R, and he is actually a zombie, and it's very much stream of consciousness driven, very character driven, so you have to be into those kinds of stories to like this. But we follow R, who is a zombie, but he's very different than the zombies he lives around. He has a stream of consciousness. He is still feeling a lot of things that he felt as a human, although it's very diluted. So one day, R goes out to hunt for some food, being humans, alive humans, with some of his other zombie friends, and he meets a girl, an alive human, non-zombie girl, and something in him changes, and he actually takes her and brings her back to where he lives, which is at like an airport, an abandoned airport with a bunch of other zombies. So he kind of takes her as captive, and from there a kind of romance ensues. The storytelling of this book is just so interesting. So we are following R and his experiences and his thoughts, but there are certain aspects to this book that allow us to additionally live through other characters. So we actually indirectly get a bunch of other POVs, and it's just a really interesting look at society. It really brings up, you know, what makes us human, and it really dissects various ways that people might respond to complete societal breakdown. We have a character who is extremely depressed. There are definitely warnings for kind of like suicide, stuff like that, self-harm. We have other characters that are extremely optimistic and keep trying to look on the bright side of things. And it's just really interesting. We have very unique, very different characters in this book, and I just had a really great time with it. We are very much just dropped into the middle. We don't know what happened or how people got infected or how it spread. So I actually really liked that aspect of it. It's not about really a zombie invasion or an outbreak. It's very much, this has already all happened. All the exciting action aspects that are in like a movie have already happened, and now society's been living with this and trying to make it work. And what does that look like now? It's just really interesting. This book was just surprisingly philosophical, and I had a really good time reading it. And finally, the last book that I read was Mean Baby by Selma Blair. So this is actually Selma's memoir, and I did listen to it on audiobook. So this was really interesting. It very much talks about Selma's growing up, and I didn't realize she was actually from Detroit. I did live in Detroit for a couple years for school, and so hearing her talk about all the hospitals and the cities around it was actually really cool because I knew everything she was talking about, and we kind of get an insight into her celebrity life. She shares stories about her and her celebrity friends, and then towards the end of the book we really get to hear about her, you know, diagnosis of MS and how that has changed her life and what she's kind of dealing with now. And she very much connects that with her time with her son, because pretty much after she had her son is when the MS started to get really bad, and that's when she actually finally learned that she had MS and has been dealing with it since. And she talks a lot about her son, and it very much is just kind of a look into Selma Blair's life, and she's very honest and open about it. She does struggle with alcoholism, and she talks about some of her disordered eating as well. So there are some heavy topics, but I really like her as an actress, and I have just gained so much respect for her and her situation and her story, and yeah, I really enjoyed it. So that is everything that I read in the month of February. If you made it to this point in the video, leave me a black heart emoji in the comments so that I know. And while you're down there, let me know what your favorite and worst book of the month was. If you liked the video, go ahead and give it a thumbs up. Consider subscribing if you're interested in future content, all the fun YouTube things that help your girl out, and I will catch you guys on the next video. Bye!